All right, cool. So this question says, I want to be able to better read the range of projections on SaberSim. Is there a possibility that you can give me 2 examples of when a player has a better range of outcomes more than another player through a picture, or what determines if the player has a good range of outcomes? So I'm going to hop back over to baseball here, and we'll talk a little bit about this. First off, well, let's go ahead and let this pull up here. So I think looking at the ranges of outcomes when you click a certain player's name is maybe not so much useful from the purposes of looking for a good range of outcomes or a bad range of outcomes, but understanding the difference in ranges of outcomes of certain players at different positions or across different sports, and then understanding why those outcomes are so different, right? I think this is best shown on baseball looking at a pitcher versus a batter, right? So if we look at someone like Blake Snell, who is our highest projected pitcher on this slate tonight, he's got a mean projection of 22.42, right? Again, that is the mathematical average of all of his game simulations that we have. And you can see that pitchers in baseball are fairly normally distributed, right? This is resembling a bell curve. A normal distribution means that a player's likelihood of scoring 10% over their mean outcome is the same as their likelihood of scoring 10% under their mean outcome, right? A perfectly normally distributed player would be a player that has a relatively lower variance in a way, right? The most common outcomes are the outcomes closest to their mean. So you can see that 22.42 outcome is probably tucked in somewhere right here. And you can see this outcome happens about 12% of the time. And the other primary outcomes that happen for this player are also all kind of condensed around the mean. Another way this can be interesting here looking at is a player's range of outcomes where it's a very steep bell curve, and most of the outcomes all take place right around the mean, means that that player is a very safe play, right? They score a lot of points around their mean outcome often. They don't have as many high outcome simulations, and they don't have as many low outcome simulations, right? We can see... So perhaps looking at this, right, someone like Taijuan Walker, you can see maybe has a little bit more volatility than someone like Blake Snell. Probably not by much, but you can see that this is a little bit of a flatter normal distribution here than Blake Snell. But where this really gets interesting is starting to look at a hitter, right? For example, Tatis, 12.32, our highest projected hitter on the slate. If he was normally distributed, you would expect that his most common outcomes were condensed around 12.32. And if we click him, we will quickly see that that's not the case. Tatis's most common outcomes are around 0, first of all, and very low scores. And it's these big upside performances that in general push the mean towards somewhere around 12 points, right? This is a player, and hitters in general have a lot of variance, have a lot of volatility compared to pitchers, right? So this can be a very useful tool in terms of understanding what high variance, high volatility positions are, what high volatility sports are, and things like that as you are getting familiar. In terms of actually affecting your research process, I think you would probably find more success using the percentiles. What the percentiles are going to do is, for example, if we set this at 85th, it is going to update the projection here, and it's going to show you what score that player hits or exceeds 15% of the time or less, right? And where you can start to get some value out of this, I think, is comparing a player's mean outcomes to their 85th percentile outcomes and looking for players that maybe have a higher ceiling compared to their mean projection, right? Those are the kinds of players we want to target for tournaments. So really, I think for the most part, this is most useful almost educationally or helping you to learn a little bit more about where volatility is in certain positions. This is really useful in football, where the difference between positions, I think, is a little more dramatic. A quarterback's range of outcomes looks quite a bit different than a running back's. versus a wide receiver versus a defense, right? In baseball, we have kind of this binary split between pitchers and batters look quite a bit different, but in football, it really starts to be a pretty interesting way to look at it here. And then one final reminder is that smart diversity is really going to be the tool that allows you to capture this information in your lineups, right? By limiting the total number of sims that we're using to determine each player's projection, it allows us to really capture that upside. We're already going to be pulling players with high ceilings into your lineups the higher smart diversity is. Great question. It comes up often here about people that are looking at this and trying to say, what is a good range of outcomes? And I think I would pivot slightly from that. Instead of thinking about what's good or what's bad, really think about what we're learning from that. And maybe one conclusion here in that way is that pitching chalk maybe can be thought of as a little bit more reliable there, right? We look at a player like Snell or something like that, who we probably expect to be pretty chalky tonight. Something like 50% of his outcomes are all going to be very close to his mean, right? We can feel a little bit more confident in a player's projection when they're a little more normally distributed. Vice versa on the hitting side, maybe this leads you to believe that chalk is a little less reliable, right? It looks like Padres are probably going to be pretty popular, Twins. And these run totals are pretty high. It's justifiable why these teams are and why these teams and players are going to be popular tonight. But it's important to remember that most of the time, all of these guys' most common outcomes or most common set of outcomes are all on this lower range, right? So they obviously have the high upside potential, but their most common outcomes are still typically 0. So always important to note there.